Moral Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of Manitoba at St. Paul's College. On behalf of our interim director of the Moral Institute, Dr. Zaina Lafia, who happens to be away traveling internationally right now, my name is Jason Brennan, and I welcome you to today's lecture. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Today's lecture is taking place both in person and online. The lecture is being recorded for future broadcast on the Moore Institute YouTube channel. Photography will also be taken and may be used in future publications, formats by the Moore Institute or by our guest lecturer, Mr. Shaun Loney. The lecture will include a 30 to 35-minute presentation, followed by a question and answer session. Online viewers are asked to type their questions in the Q&A box in the Zoom platform, and we'll get to them as we get to that session. Our lecturer today, Mr. Shaun Loney. Shaun co-founded and mentored the establishment of 12 different social enterprises in urban and First Nation communities across Canada. His work has changed how governments interact with social enterprises. Shaun and Encompass co-ops seek to expand their impact by helping others to start social enterprise or to create space for problem-solving sector to grow. One of Shaun's 3 books, An Army of Problem Solvers, has sold more than 8,000 copies to date, and I point that out not because of the sales, which is great, but it's that book that came to the attention of Peace and Conflict Studies professor and the Moore Institute co-founding director, Dr. Shaun Byrne, another Shaun, and it was Shaun Byrne who brought Shaun Loney to my attention as a potential lecturer. So thank you to both Shauns, one for both of you. Thank you. So, just want to say a couple other quick things. In identifying key issues such as poverty, homelessness, public safety, the environment and climate change, in her post-election article entitled New Mayor Should Consult with Election Rivals, Winnipeg Free Press writer Erna Buffy said that new Mayor Scott Gillingham would do well to consult with other key candidates for mayor post-election in order to build a solid citywide consensus to address these issues. Shaun Loney, for example, she wrote, has a proven track record in the alternate energy sector in creating innovative solutions to address both homelessness and crime. The post-election Free Press editorial struck a similar tone, saying that Gillingham's infrastructural inclinations notwithstanding, the new mayor must prioritize issues that cannot be solved with heavy equipment and concrete. Poverty, homelessness, addiction, and the crime that springs from all 3 are the concerns that cast a pall over Winnipeg's other plans and dreams. They are the city's most difficult, heartbreaking problems, the editorial continued, and if Winnipeggers really did speak, surely most would tell Mr. Gillingham this is where his hard work must begin. Today we invite 2022 mayoral candidate Mr. Shaun Loney to help us identify some of the places and the means by which that hard work must begin. We invite him to answer the question, what unelected citizens can do to make real change in Winnipeg. And I invite Mr. Loney to join us.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Most people come here are obviously doctors. I'm not. My learning has come less in institution and more in the front lines. Thanks very much for inviting me and for all of you for being here. Our guests joining us online. We'll also be pushing this out on our social media channels. When Jason contacted me, I thought, the timing probably is about right to let Winnipeggers know what I'm up to, how I see things unfolding. The election was a fascinating experience. Something, as you know, I wasn't really on my bucket list. I think a lot of people who run for office, I was uncomfortable with the attention. I remember seeing those lawn signs in the beginning. I was like, wow, it's got my name on there. And I'm much better behind the scenes. I did get some new suits out of the whole experience and some very uncomfortable shoes. But Fiona and I took some time off after the election to just kind of process. But it didn't take long to sort of reevaluate the landscape. And that's what we're all about. If you're joining this talk, is like how do we make change because we have to make change. And I'm happy to report that I am very optimistic. I'm optimistic about our city, about how the city is going to change, but we need your help, and we need your help in some surprising ways. And part of it is just to help Winnipeggers let go of the way that we've been doing things. We have what we need. One of the things that's really clear to me, and I said during the election from day one, is that resolving issues like homelessness does not require more money. We're spending enormous amounts of money responding to people who are homeless now. And if you were to design a system, you would be hard-pressed to find a system that is more expensive and less effective than the one we've got. So putting more money into it and not changing the general fabric of how we relate to each other would be a lost opportunity. So I wanted to start off with, and we'll talk a bit about the mayor here shortly as well. We've had 2 long sessions, and the mayor has been very gracious to me, and I feel like we're working together on a bunch of fronts, and I think that's what Winnipeggers want. So I'm part of the reason why I feel optimistic is because of him. And it's not every, I let him have it on Kenniston and the Chief Peguis Trail. I didn't bring those up when we talked, but I certainly did talk about homelessness and crime in the city and poverty, and I think he gets where I'm coming from, and I think we're pretty well aligned. I wanted to start with a bit of context today, and also not how you talk in an election, but this dude has taught me a lot. I found his diary in the Glenbow Museum discount bin for $5. He's an Indian agent from 1905, William Graham, and he was talking in his diary. He said something, "How peculiar." Is the title of the chapter, and what he was talking about is that he saw this moose hunter coming back from the bush, this Cree moose hunter around Fort Capella in 1905, and he says to the moose hunter, "Oh, no luck today?" And the guy says, "Yeah, I got a moose." He said, "Well, where is it?" Says William Graham, and the moose hunter says, "Well, I'm coming back to tell the women in the community that I shot it." And he says, "Why would you do that? Why would you tell people that you shot a moose? You should go and take it for yourself, for your own family." And the moose hunter looks at him kind of confused and says, "Well, that's not how we do things." And about half an hour later, William Graham's writing in his diary, there comes 15 women. He called them squaws in his diary. And they went out and took the hide off the moose, cut it in 15 equal pieces, and they brought it back and shared it in the community. And so William Graham says, "How peculiar." And I think part of our challenge is recognizing these indigenous economies and how they built love and compassion into how things were done. And what does that look like in 2023 in Winnipeg? And so I'm going to go through that a little bit today and give you lots of reasons to be hopeful. I also just want to echo William Graham's words saying how peculiar, and say how peculiar that we have epidemic levels of incarceration. It's $80,000 a year to incarcerate somebody. And it's just such an ineffective, expensive system. And how peculiar that the most visited place in Winnipeg by Winnipeg Fire and Paramedics last year was a bus shelter. How peculiar. How peculiar that it's cheaper to install ground source heat pumps in Winnipeg on a life cycle basis than to install natural gas furnaces, but we keep doing it. How peculiar. How peculiar that we keep buying diesel buses when electric buses are cheaper over the long term. How peculiar, how peculiar, how peculiar. And so those are kind of the words that I think when we ask these questions, we're beginning to see the paradigm shift, and we're recognizing that, hey, we've been swimming in this water for a long time. We've noticed the seaweed, we've noticed the other fish, the gravel in the bottom of the lake or the ocean, but we've never noticed the water before. And we're beginning to notice the water. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so what's unfolding in Winnipeg is very exciting. I've seen it. More people are seeing it. And more people are seeing it in part because we ran a great campaign. And we ran it hopefully and positively. And I was not dismissed in the campaign. I finished well back of Councillor Gillingham in that regard, but there were people really arguing with what I was saying about poverty and crime reduction. They're just maybe like, what's going on there? So that's sort of what's unfolding now. So I carry this guy with me, and he's informative. We just want to kind of do the opposite of whatever he was talking about. So where did I end up? I'm working full-time at Aki Energy and Aki Foods, and these are two social enterprises that I helped to start many years ago, and I hesitated going back there because it's not about Winnipeg, I thought at first. And my Buddhist monk buddy was telling me, Shaun, you need to go where the current is. And there's a lot of current in these two enterprises, and the decolonizing of the relationship between Aki Energy and Aki Foods and governments. And so to moving away from these colonial funding models, which William Graham loves funding because it's how he can suppress the reemergence of local economies. It's how they can control what nonprofits and First Nations are doing. Funding is a tool of compliance. It's not a tool that values outcomes. And so with Aki Energy, we've installed a lot of ground source heat pumps in Manitoba. It took us 8 years to do 614, and that was through the pandemic. But we are negotiating a contract now for 400, and the time in which it takes to do 400 will be 3 years probably. So you can see how quickly things are ramping up. And we're adding in air source heat pumps, and we're actually going to start doing work in other provinces as well. And this is a government of Canada not funding, but buying what Aki Energy's system does. So installing ground source heat pumps on First Nations. But we're not just doing that. We're saying to government, you need to pay for what it is we're doing, which is lowering utility bills. And it's also reducing the number of people on social assistance. It's reducing carbon in the atmosphere. And Efficiency Manitoba is a customer of ours as well. They're buying from us the impact that's important to them. And so it's just really, really exciting. And money is no longer the problem. It's the building of the capacity to get going as quickly as possible. So, and I realize this is about Winnipeg because I'm able to say this describes the relationship that the city of Winnipeg needs to have with the police, for example, with nonprofits and the police, and that's what I'm going to talk about here shortly. But here's some of my coworkers learning how to install ground source heat pumps on First Nations, and yes, we are going to bring this into Winnipeg, and it needs to be done ASAP. We need to stop hooking up new houses to natural gas. It's not actually complicated, it's just different. With Aki Foods, we again started in 2015 in the Island Lake region of Manitoba, and interestingly, my grandparents lived there in the 1960s. They were United Church ministers, and when I was a kid, my grandpa, I remember him saying, when they left Garden Hill First Nation, that was the last garden there. It's like, what a strange comment, but as a kid I had absolutely no idea but I remember him saying that. Well, through the work of Four Arrows and others, Byron Beardy, Robert Guilford, and others, we started a 13-acre farm. And we thought we were starting a farm, but as Jane Jacobs describes the economic development process, nice starting point, but things began to evolve. The kids have their own plots at the farm. We started selling healthy food as well. And we're moving rapidly towards supporting a group of 1,000 people in the Island Lake region, keeping in mind 4 to 5 First Nations kids will have type 2 diabetes. Think about that for a minute. 4 to 5 First Nations kids will have type 2 diabetes. And remember what I said before, be hard pressed to design a system that was more expensive and less effective than the system that we have now. But thank goodness we designed a system so we can design systems that work as well. And so what we're doing is we're engaging Indigenous Services Canada and saying, look, we'll lower blood sugar levels in this cohort of 1,000 people. Will you pay us the value of reducing those blood sugar levels? It's a decolonizing of the relationship between governments and nonprofits. It's very exciting. And while at first I thought I spent a year and a half of my life talking about nothing but Winnipeg, realizing the impact that these social enterprises and the relationships with governments have on Winnipeg is profound. So both these social enterprises and others are located in the Social Enterprise Center, 765 Main Street. If you haven't been there, pop by. This is the future of Winnipeg. 30,000 feet of nonprofit businesses that are hiring people with barriers to employment. You heard me during the election say a lot. Our defining issue as a city is our ability to connect the people who most need the work with the work that most needs to be done. The most important conversation I had during the election was I went into that bus shelter that is the most visited address of Winnipeg Fire and Paramedics. I met in there during the campaigns in front of Lions Manor. There's about 8 people in there. I said, look, I'm running for mayor, and they looked at me like I had some issues. And I said, have you ever heard of BUILD before? And the whole bus shelter lit up. Yes, my cousin worked there. My sister worked there. Can you get me a job there? I said, look, I will not quit until everyone who wants a job has a supportive place to land. That is Winnipeg's defining issue. And we're going to get there. These are my buddies, Chris and David. We first met insulating low-income housing. I call them the $1 million men because of the massive amounts of public dollars are putting into chasing these guys around, when in fact they give really nice hugs. They know how to punch a punch clock, and they're great co-workers. And we need to connect the work that most needs to be done to the people who most need the work. We know how to do this. BUILD's model is already in actually now 7 different Canadian cities. I know how to do this. We know how to do this. It's actually not complicated. We're waiting for governments to say, you know what we're doing now is not working. And the first step is to stop asking for more money. It sounds weird, but there's lots of money. And I indicated some of this before. The NDP government received, this is a Dewar administration, received a report from the Auditor General saying you're going to need another $1.5 billion to keep up with this incarceration strategy of yours. And it's just insane the amount of money we're putting. When Chris and David don't, it's not effective. We call it a correction system. It just doesn't work. When people are getting out of jail, we need to meet them with what it is that they need. And for a lot of people, it's jobs. For some people, it's supportive housing. To the Aki Foods piece, it's $1 million a year to treat someone with dialysis in northern Manitoba. There's about 50 people in the Island Lake region waiting for dialysis treatment there, which is local. And that's $100,000 a year to treat them. It's $1 million per bed and $100,000 a year. And same thing with child welfare. $1.8 million to raise a child in care. Very little supports for the parents. These are not problems that require more money. They're system failure. And we need new systems. And thank God, love and compassion is a way cheaper and a way more effective. And what's requiring us to think about nonprofits using different tools. Everything I've done has been nonprofit. I'm not interested in doing things for a for-profit basis. But nonprofits need to use market tools in order to say, look, our solutions are better than the status quo. We would like that recognized. We would like our solution compared. And so I've traveled a couple times to Scotland. They have, this is a Haven Industries. They have 8 different offices throughout Scotland. It's lunchtime, so you actually don't see the employees here. But they're recycling electronics. And you can't get a job there unless you have a criminal record. So, well, who's your biggest customer? I say naively. The Scotland Police. Okay. So, Fiona and I are riding a bus in Glasgow, and we asked the bus driver, is this how we get to where we're going? And we could not understand what the bus driver was saying. And this woman comes from the back of the bus, and she interprets for us, say, yeah, you're on the right bus, and you transfer here, there. So I sat down with her, and she says, what are you doing in Glasgow? And I said, I'm just trying to figure out why you have so many social enterprises. I'm here, I'm writing a book, I'm learning about your ecosystem. And she says, the words I think we need to hear in Winnipeg, that she says, oh, they're very civilized, aren't they? Well, that's what William Graham was trying to do to the Indians, right? The civilizing. Well, now these indigenous business models, which incorporate love and compassion, are civilizing us. So look at these numbers in Scotland, actually, and I looked on the internet the other day. They're up to 6,000 social enterprises now. Half of them hiring people with barriers to employment. 2/3 led by women. The average CEO of these social enterprises making 2.5 times as much as the average worker. Compare that to our employment strategy, where 2 out of Canada's top 100 companies are led by women. Imagine how hard you have to work to be that far off the median. Those CEOs make 209 times as much as the average worker before stock options. And when's the last time you saw a major employer with a serious strategy around employing people that don't have access to labor market? I've never seen it. I've never even seen an Indigenous bus driver in Winnipeg. We need more social enterprises to connect the people who most need the work with the work that most needs to be done. And the good news is, and by the way, that's about 1,000 social enterprises in Winnipeg. Think about that for a minute. 1,000 builds, 1,000 Aki Energies, 1,000 Aki Foods, 1,000 Purpose Construction, all of these different entities, 1,000 Compost Winnipegs. How exciting that is. And the city of Winnipeg now has a social procurement policy. It was 9 years in the making, but they've got one. So now we got to use it and improve it and make sure that companies doing business with social enterprises are rewarded in the tendering process. Make sure that social enterprises have access to city contracts. It's coming. There's reason to be very optimistic. This picture on the left is from the Northlands Denisovan First Nation, where Aki Energies installed a major biomass ground source heat pump and solar system. But I just love that. That's diesel that's hauled up on the winter roads, that's toxic, that creates no jobs locally for heating homes. And again, it would be hard to design a system that is more expensive and less effective than that. And we want to compete against that, but funding is not allowing that comparison to take place. And so things are evolving. And we call it social innovation. And think of it like technical innovation, where none of us had iPhones or smartphones, and then 3 years later the market penetration was massive. It's because of convergence of a whole bunch of things at the same time that cause those big growth rates. And with social innovation, just listen to the convergence. Taxpayers are exhausted, just can't keep up with the costs of managing these problems. Foundations, which we'll talk about briefly in a minute, they're growing quickly, but they're not getting the social impact that they want. 96% of their money is not spent on or not connected to their mandates. 96% of the Winnipeg Foundation's money is not connected to their mandates. They want that. They want more impact, which is exciting. National discussions around reconciliation, around climate change. Winnipeggers wanting to feel good about where our money's invested. These are all things that are young people that want to do something with their lives, their careers matching their values. These are all things that are pressing down on Winnipeg right now. And I'm excited because things are gonna move quickly here. So back to the social procurement policy. The most successful example in the country is with Manitoba Housing. Well, imagine as we move from just Manitoba Housing really into social procurement with municipal systems. And we don't require special treatment. We require fair competition. Isn't that interesting? So traditional procurement on the left, where governments are buying the goods and services that they buy. And then on the right, they're getting those things, plus they're getting all these other things that are important to them. Like, for example, reduction in the number of people in the back of police cars. So this is the comparison that the social procurement policy will allow government officials to value, the comparison between one and the other. We do not require special treatment. We require fair treatment. The Winnipeg Chamber of Commerce calls this a disruptive business model. They're pushing this hard. The Business Council of Manitoba has been very supportive as well. So after the election, some of my campaign team said, let's keep going. Like, what? What are you talking about? I said, well, we made a promise to Winnipeggers. Let's do it. Okay, well, more social enterprises. So several of us from the campaign team have been mentoring the Excel Employment Center. These are women from South Sudan. That guy looks a little like me, but it's not me. It's Ed Taves, and he is a semi-retired Rotarian. David Newman dug him up for us, and he's training these gals to paint. Who wouldn't, if you have painting to do, who wouldn't want to have these women over to your house to do the painting? How do you compete with that if you're a private company that doesn't hire South Sudanese women? Now, the challenge is getting the resources we need to do the training so that they can get up to speed. Well, we should be dropping this kind of money from the police helicopter or from immigration services or from family services. They're all on social assistance, and they don't understand why Heather Stephenson next week is going to give everybody checks. They said, we just want to work. Well, employers in Winnipeg, in the trades especially, are desperate for workers. This is not complicated. So there are 5 women receiving the training. They have 100 women ready to go. And when I met them, they're making quilts for Ukrainian refugees. I said, do you not have enough refugees of your own? He says, well, we were helped when we got here. It's our turn now. And that is the kind of Winnipeg that I want to live in. And damn well we're going to get it. We're going to move in that direction because love and compassion beats out the gong show that is the status quo that we're all living with now. But we need new systems. So I'll come back to that shortly. Now, here's what the new is as simple as we can describe it. And here's government's what they kind of know is coming is that upper trajectory. This is a slide we used on the diabetes front, but it's the same if it's policing. And I'll show you a police slide here shortly. But what we're saying to governments is, if we get that trajectory down, will you split the savings with us? You don't have to pay unless we do it. That's the value proposition that we're making to governments now. And when you talk to them that way, they like it. They like it a lot. It's very different than what we're asking for presently. But this is from Twitter about 3 weeks ago. This is a police chief saying publicly, look, here's our call volume on the left in blue. It's going up 4% a year. So if we don't get more resources, then we're going to have longer wait times, and nobody wants that. So, but there's another way of addressing this problem, and that's reducing the workload. So I'm making my way through the police board, and Mayor Gillingham has been very supportive of this, is to say, can we do something different here? Which is a partnership with the nonprofit sector to say, if we get that workload down, will you split the savings with us? And we're having similar conversations with Manitoba Justice. No one disagrees. Our enemy is the inertia of the status quo. And I don't know, I'm looking for an actual conservative at the provincial government. I am looking for a conservative or a progressive at the municipal government. I'm looking hard, and because that's what it requires here, is people that understand that what we're doing now is not working, and just continuing putting more money into this is not going to get us the city that we want. Defunding is also not something that is going to get us, because the police are really dug in on that. And it's important that we make progress. So we all agree there needs to be much more money spent in the nonprofit sector, and it needs to come out of the police budget. We agree with that, and this is the mechanism to do it. And I think the police are going to love this once we get through talking to the police board. And generally, and if you've read my recent workbook called The Beautiful Bailout, this describes the movement of the money. My coworker is a former chief of the Garden Hill First Nation. When we looked at the infographic, he said, it's a circle. Yeah, it's a circle. This is an indigenous way of moving money. You start with impact investors, such as the Winnipeg Foundation. The money goes to the community nonprofit that is providing the intervention. The police or justice, in the case of David and Chris, say, wow, we're seeing a lot less of them now. They recognize the financial benefits on their system, and the money comes back around and around and around, and it's very exciting. Now, a quick note on where's the money going to come from. We were all pretty excited when the Winnipeg Foundation received a $500 million bequest. That's a lot of cashola. Came in the form of real estate. The foundation community, I think, in Winnipeg and across Canada is beginning to say, we can't measure our impact by the amount of grants that we're making. Are we making progress on poverty? Are we reducing our carbon footprint significantly? And how can foundations help reorient governments away from managing problems towards solving problems in the first place, which is cheaper and it's what everybody wants. And as I was saying earlier, 96% of foundation money is not connected to their mandate. And this is our friend Joan Lawson. Her dad started the Lawson Foundation. They've been fantastic with us. While she's up in Garden Hill, we put her to work in the farm. She's harvesting root crop there of some kind. And yeah, they've been granting money towards us, but they are a key investor in Aki Foods, how we're changing, decolonizing our relationship with governments. So lots of reasons to be hopeful there. Our campaign team also, we're going to be launching a community bond. And these are popping up around Canada and throughout North America. This particular one is from our friends in Guelph. 10C is the name of the nonprofit, 10 Carden. It just happens to be the address of their nonprofit. They bought a $2 million building downtown Guelph. And they just went to the market and said, look, if you give us $1,000 of investment, take Series E there, we'll give you a $30 check every year for 5 years, and then at the end of 5 years, we'll ask you if you want your money back. So we formed a relationship with Tapestry Capital, a nonprofit social enterprise out of Toronto that's raised $100 million already of community bonds. What do we want to do with it? We're going to buy land. We're going to buy land so nonprofits, co-ops, supportive housing providers can move faster, can move quicker. We're going to use it to install ground source heat pump loops at no upfront cost for homeowners. So when they're making the decision between, do I keep going with natural gas or do I go with something that is going to save me money monthly, that's going to create jobs locally, and is going to do something about reducing our carbon footprint, let homeowners make that decision. I know which decision Winnipeg families are going to go with. And we also want to use it to help incubate more social enterprises. Those South Sudanese women they need some upfront resources to buy the paint, to buy a vehicle in order for them to be able to do business. Things that if it were me starting a business, I'd phone my brother or my uncle or my aunt and get a loan or just even a grant. They don't have access to that kind of capital. So we're pretty pumped about this community bonds thing, and these are all things that if the city jumps on board, like I campaigned on 500 new level 2 electric chargers, and we need them desperately. But if the city can't get its head around that, we're just going to do it. Same thing with the heat pump loops. The Winnipeg Water and Waste needs to be offering that as a mature utility. This is our utility. They already finance the installation of water pipes across property lines even. This is something that makes total sense. But if we can't do it, we're not going to wait. We're going to do it ourselves. But the invitation is there for the city to do that. And lastly, this is how I see social innovation happening. And there is no better city on earth than Winnipeg to get this going now and to really free up all these underutilized resources that we have. We have a caring foundation community that's ready for more impact. We've got governments understanding we can't keep dumping more and more money into the systems that we have. It's just not getting us the output that we want. We got young people that are leaving the city that want to stay here and to do meaningful things. We've got renewable electricity that we can use to power heat pumps. It's a sunny city. We can do rooftop solar here as well even. And we have this amazing indigenous wisdom embedded in the city that no one else has. They know how to get us out of the mess that we're in. They just need the systems change that is critically important. And so with that, I want you to be optimistic. I am optimistic. I lost the damn mayor's race and I'm optimistic, so you can be optimistic too. And thank you for being on this journey with me and for believing that we can make things happen. And we can be a city that we're all so proud of, and things are lining up nicely. Miigwech. And one of the things I've never learned to do very well in the campaign was to smile. My mom would say, "Can you smile a little more often?" It's like, well, it's hard to smile when you're cranky. But I met a lot of great people on the campaign, including Chris is here as one of our competitors as well. And what a kind, compassionate, forward-thinking guy. And thank you for your contribution to the city. And also, so I think it's just kind of cool. Al Macklin is here, who was a cabinet minister in the Schreier government. And Ed Schreier was 34 when he was premier. 34 years old. And that was a government that got up in the morning and said, we can change our situation. And you brought us Autopac, Unicity, for example. And we need that kind of government here again. Not transactional governments, but governments that can make big changes in positive new areas. So, Jason, do you have any questions online, or
Yeah,
should?
so thank you very much, Shaun. We've got about 15 or 20 minutes to take questions. There's already a couple online, and for those that are online, and there's a good number of them, please type in your questions into the Q&A box, and then what I will do is I will invite you to bring voice here. I'll turn on your microphone, you can ask your question. If you choose not to, if I don't hear your voice, I will read your question for you, and of course we'll take questions from the room as well. So I open the floor in the room, and if I don't see anything immediately, I'll go to the online questions. All right, so I'm going to go to the first online question, and Manju, I'm going to give you the permission to speak. If you would like to, you can ask your question in person, or I will read it for you.
Hey, my question is, it's such a beautiful philosophy which more and more people should know in the world and follow it. What fuels it? What makes you work towards it? I would like to know so we can understand and try to follow your path.
So the question is, what makes me?
Yes, what fuels it, you said?
Oh, interesting.
Yes, what makes you do it? What you're doing?
I would need a psychiatrist, I think, to answer that properly. But my spirit name is Benisuan Meno Yawin. That Stan McKay told me what my spirit name is. You don't get a spirit name; you already have it. It's just unveiled by elders that have that gift, and it means Benisuan Meno Yawin means thundering healer. And for me, the thundering is my rage with the system the way that it is, and why is it so easy for my family to participate in the economy and so difficult for so many others. And the healing part is really a lifelong journey about understanding my privilege, of which I have so much. Because privilege and poverty are connected. You can't actually have one without the other. And so I'm uncovering more of my privilege, or having me see and recognize on a daily basis, and how that impacts others, and how I can use my privilege. So I feel, thanks for the question, I think I'm just trying to live honestly, and I'm at the sort of prime of my life now where I've got enough experience seeing how these systems can work, how they don't work, and a path forward. And I just want to put the pedal to the metal. And how nice it was to have, signs up throughout the city, people saying, I want this type of city. And no one had heard of me before the election. My mom had heard of me, but she couldn't vote for me because she lives in Ontario. So Winnipeggers know me now, and that's thanks to all the people who are working on the campaign, the people who donated, the people who put up signs, the people who join meetings online, and we're not going to quit. And people are disagreeing with us. This isn't, we don't have to outshout anybody, we just have to overcome the inertia of the systems that we're living with now.
Question in the room, yes. If you could just remove your microphone
Sure.
so we can speak loudly and clearly. Thank you.
One of the things that I was impressed with when you ran was, as you got towards the date of the election, you were talking about what you plan to do, and I think, I don't know whether it was the first 100 days, but you seem to be plotting out what your actions were going to be.
Yeah.
I've been pretty frustrated watching the mayor, the inactivity that I've seen. I've seen him open more restaurants than I have actually announced things, and when he has announced things, it's been to put in a clause to let people own multiple Airbnbs, which I think is part of the homelessness problem. Having talked to him and a couple of times and had some, can you give us any insight into what his process is? Because I'm trying to be optimistic, and I'm struggling to see a way forward with him. I'm just not sure. I'm unclear what his plan is.
Yeah, well, that's why we need to lead as citizens, and I think he his type of leadership will be doing what the city needs in order to make these good, solid plans happen. And in the conversations I've had with him, he was wanting to know more. I found him to be very kind and generous and thoughtful. And he's interested in the experience that I've gained working on the front lines, the relationships we've built with foundations who want to do things differently, and a recognition that we as policing, for example, that things need to be different. So here's how I said this during the election so often, is that this isn't complicated. It's just different. So we go to the police and say, okay, can you come up with a list of 100 people who are in contact with you so often that it's costing $5,000 a month in staff time? Absolutely. Long, long list. Would you agree to pay a nonprofit $3,000 a month for every month you don't see them? That's it. That's it. It's not complicated. There's a few people said, Shaun, it's complicated. No, that's not complicated. That's different. But governments value what they buy. They don't value what they fund. And so it was a weird situation during the election too, where I had the lowest tax increase of the major competitors. I somehow ended up being the only actual conservative candidate in there, small c conservative, because I'm recognizing we don't need more money to solve the problems. Like, look at 911 calls. The way they just keep going up, up, up. Or I would say, well, where are those calls coming from, and how can we reduce the number of calls? That makes more sense to me. And when I say conservative, I mean it provocatively, in a sense that we want to use our money wisely. And there's a lot of people in Winnipeg who would say, that's me, that's me, that's me. Okay, well, would you pay $3,000 a month for every month that these people you're expecting to see on a nearly weekly basis, instead of the $5,000 a month that you're booked? You've got it in your books as to what you're going to spend. And we're getting a lot of people saying, yes. Okay, we got a lot of yeses. Now let's sign some agreements and show how transformative this can be. I feel like we can do it. And I feel like the mayor knows I want what's best for the city. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. And there's a lot of momentum around these First Nation agreements. That's why I took the time to go through that, Aki Energy and Aki Foods. A lot of people talking nationally about those. And so it's get it done time now. And the mayor needs to move, and I think he's willing to do that. I feel good about it.
Thank you, Shaun. There's a couple of questions online, and just one comment. Patricia writes, I just want to read it because it's nice. Inspiring. I believe what you're doing now is more valuable than being mayor. So congratulations on your loss. Patricia, you have a question there too, but I'm just going to go to another one first. Naomi, if you would like to ask your question, I'm going to turn on your microphone for you. If you're just a moment. And if I don't hear your voice, I will ask a question for you.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Hi. Shaun, I also want to just thank you for running in the campaign and just for really, turning my brain on to these new ideas which are so pragmatic. It's very exciting. Could you describe more actions you think the everyday Winnipegger could take to advance these ideas? You could hire a social enterprise, write letters or emails, if possible, invest in community bonds. What else?
So I heard a couple people report back to me about a fundraiser that Wab Canoe was putting on with doctors. And there were 250 doctors in the room. I don't know who it was, but apparently one doctor got up and said, so can you tell me when you're going to implement Shaun Loney's platform so that we can reduce the number of people that are interacting with our systems? I don't know who that was, but that's a very effective way of talking to politicians to ask them some questions, but instead of saying like, you know, what are you going to do about homelessness? Like the NDP has a plan, and I'll be writing about it. They call it the Houston model, about addressing homelessness. So, but it's not really the right question. What are you going to do about homelessness? Because it's an open-ended answer. It's like, what are you going to do to reduce the number of people that are interacting with emergency services? So I don't believe we have a homelessness problem, or we have a homelessness issue, but we're not going to solve it focusing on the problem. We need to go to where the money is, and that's in emergency services, and then work our way backwards. What's the solution to overburdened emergency services? Supportive housing, supportive employment. But how we get the money for that. So thanks, is it Naomi, for asking the question, and I think we have a provincial election coming up, and I'm kind of tired of the same old, and we need to inject ourselves into the election and demand common sense across all three political parties, all four political parties. So that's something that's needed. Also, we're going to have an event at some point. We're going to raise some cash for these amazing women who are starting the painting enterprise and some other social enterprises that we're mentoring. You can have them come over and paint your house as well, get an estimate from them. And we're going to launch this community bond. So that'll be coming. Exactly when, I'm hesitant to say, but we're working on it. And I think Winnipeggers are going to love these tools, that we can give us the ability to get involved in the solutions game here in Winnipeg. So I think that's pretty critical as well. So thanks for your question. Those will be some highlights for me. We'll put together something for the provincial election, and so that there's an agenda that I think common sense Winnipeggers are endorsing, that we want to hear politicians talking about. Send an email. I've been a little underwhelmed with the number of people at the legislature that have reached out to say, can we talk? I've met with John Gerard a couple times. That's it. So I'd like to. I think Winnipeggers are interested in moving forward in a new way, and we're here to help. So invite you to weigh in on that front too.
Any questions in the room? Yes.
I know you've said that you've met with the current mayor, and that he's interested in learning more about how his office and the council can address some of the social concerns in the city. And also, my question is about stronger mayoral powers. And I know every mayor since previous mayor have always said, whether they understand it or not, they say, we can do something, but we can't do it alone because we're limited in our power and our authority to try to address them locally, just locally. And and I know that there's a provincial election coming up, and it got me thinking about how can the province work with the city government to expand or increase the mayoral powers, just the mayoral office, to try to do these things.
So thanks for the question. I didn't campaign on changing the strong mayor model, and I know Councillor Gillingham has made some changes. I didn't bring it up because I don't think that's the problem at City Hall. Like, I similarly, I don't think Brian Pallister, Heather Stephenson, Brian Bowman want homelessness. I don't think anybody does. I just think we're using really outdated tools. And if I were mayor, I'm pretty confident I would have people rallying around new approaches to things where no matter what their where they place themselves on these old paradigm, that they could see their values reflected in the path forward. So that's why I say at the provincial government, I'm looking for an actual conservative that is interested in spending money more efficiently. And the mayor, I understand, is a conservative as well. So when I talk to him, it's through that lens, is that we need to spend the money we're spending now differently, and here's the tools in order to do it. So yeah, I don't think the strong mayor problem, or like spending political capital on changing that. I would rather say, you know, to the police, for example, will you spend $3,000, pay a nonprofit $3,000 a month for every month you don't see somebody, when you know you're going to be spending $5,000 a month on an endless basis? That's where I want my political efforts and my political capital to be spent right now. But not that it, you know, we can reorganize City Hall. We can't. It's just, it's not a priority for me right now. Good questions.
This might be the last question of the afternoon, but it's an online question, and I'm going to ask Bruce to bring it to. It invites you to share your social business entrepreneurship mind to a particular problem. Bruce, if you're there, I'm going to turn on your microphone. Wow, he just logged off the very moment I was about to push the button. I'm going to ask a question because I think it's a good one, and it might help us wrap up. Is there a social business enterprise for diabetes remission? You identified, you know, different ways that the diabetes is a significant problem and numbers that I didn't even fathom. But what would be the social business approach to the problem of diabetes?
So Aki Foods has weighed into that space. We're going to be getting paid for reducing blood sugar levels and using very entrepreneurial strategies to give people options to the monopoly retailers that they have now. And more local food, more hunting, more fishing, more gardening, all that. In Israel, there's 4 countries around the world that are using this strategy. And in Israel, it's just so simple. Nonprofits are working with 2,500 pre-diabetics, and they're getting paid based on the number of them that don't become diabetic within 5 years. It's shockingly simple. People say it's complicated. That is not complicated. That's different. So then the governments begin to understand the value of solutions. And that's what the moose hunter, that's why William Graham was confused. Because he didn't understand an economy where solutions were valued. Greed was rewarded in the economy that he understood. And we need in Winnipeg to move towards an economy where love and compassion are embedded in the everyday things that we do. They're not, that's a nice project where love and compassion is embedded, great. We need our systems to have love and compassion embedded, and for those things, the impact of love and compassion to be valued. And that's what I'm on about. And I'm just very grateful for those of you who, well, you all took the time to come out and listen to what I had to say today. That means a lot to me. I'm grateful for all the people who worked on the campaign to get this message out. And we're going to just keep growing it. And we're going to do it by inviting people into the tent. And it's not my tent. It's just a tent of common sense. It's a tent that can be described as, you know, what was going on with that moose hunter and what does that look like in 2023. And we're going to move forward in a way that we can be really proud of our city. And I'm grateful for all of you. Thanks for coming out today. Oh, it's such a nice wind-up there, Jason.
Yeah, it was excellent. We have a number of students that are online, and
Okay.
none of them have asked a question until now. So would you take one more?
Sure, of course,
question
yeah.
from a student? I'm going to ask Anya to speak her question if she would like, and if she doesn't, I will read her question.
Hi, Hi, thanks so much for this presentation. My question was, well, my comment was first that your common sense approach to addressing social problems like homelessness, mass incarceration, and chronic healthcare issues and inequities is both striking and convincing. And as someone who works within the realm of the arts and education, I wonder how we can apply these same communication approaches to topics whose outcomes are harder to measure so quantitatively or numerically.
Good question, Sonia. There's a judge in Victoria that was really tired of seeing the same people in her courtroom all the time. This is about 6 or 7 years ago. And she was also an art enthusiast. And her idea was not particularly shocking. Can we get some resources for nonprofits to work with people for whom art would be a really great outlet for them? And I think it was 300 people in Victoria, and the police said, yeah, we spent $9.2 million on this group in the last 40 months. So the police, it didn't take them long to calculate the amount of staff time responding to this particular group. The data is all there, and it's simple to use it to track. And the idea stopped there because the next step was she asked governments for funding, and they said what governments operating out of an old paradigm say all too often. We can't afford to save money. And so what we need to do with her idea is to decolonize the relationship between nonprofit art organizations and, say, for example, the police, and to connect them through the tools of which I briefly described today and which I've written about. And so the police can buy the impact of art, and art, the whole approach around healing, of which art can be a part of. It has to be a whole wraparound, customized solution, but art can be a big part of that. And so the police would then be paying for the impact of that art on their system. And I believe art has a very valuable role to play in the future of Winnipeg to help us with what we're struggling with right now, all of us on our healing journey. I mean, we are sending police officers to respond to people living in bus shelters. We need to be sending supportive housing, mental health treatment, addictions treatment. We need healing too. We've designed this system that is brutal on all kinds of different fronts. And so I'm excited about the future of revenue for art organizations as it pertains to helping Winnipeg with the challenges that we're really struggling with. So that's sort of part of the answer, Sonia. The other part is that, and I'm starting to forget some of these numbers, but this is a massive amount of our tax increases every year are going towards emergency services. I've forgotten the number already. It's massive. So we can quickly get that number right-sized, and what's going to happen is that there'll be more resources for the things that we really value in the city, such as art. So to give a longer answer, but those are a couple quick thoughts. We need to keep funding art organizations. I made a huge announcement during the campaign, billboard tax and an Airbnb tax, and all of that money being directed towards art organizations in Winnipeg. We need to keep doing that, but we also need to begin to invite artists and the police, for example, to engage in more modern ways. And so we can start to see the value of art and pay for the value of that whole process. So, great question.
Thanks so much, Shaun, for taking the final question from our student. We appreciate that. Thank you again for coming, Shaun Loney, and Encompass Co-op. Wish you well as we go chart the future.
Thanks for the invitation, Jason. It means a lot to me, it really does. Thanks.